Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Kshama Sawant, former Seattle City Council member, and her and socialists in Seattle. Yes, there are socialists in Seattle. Were able to win historically the $15 minimum wage when she was on the council. And maybe not surprisingly, now that she has left the council and is with Workers Strike Back full time, the Seattle City Council members, Democrats, are trying to chip away at that. Not getting a lot of mainstream attention, surprisingly. First, tell us what exactly are the Democrats on the Seattle City Council trying to do? Are they trying to get rid of the $15 minimum wage wholesale, or take a scalpel to it?
As you correctly said, Jordan, we won this victory, which was really the first major city. Seattle became the first major city to win the $15 an hour minimum wage. The 15 Now movement that we built here ended up, and the victory that we won ended up inspiring working people in so many other cities and states that at this moment, millions of workers have won $15 an hour on the basis of the victory that we won here in Seattle. And you're exactly right. It was led by socialists like myself, and us having won our election as a socialist with $15 an hour as the flagship demand when we ran our city council campaign in 2013 was the pivotal push that was needed in order to win. And the strategy we used through my office, where we didn't make backroom deals with the Democrats, didn't tell workers, oh, we need to make compromises with the Democrats. Instead, we built a fighting movement through the 15 Now campaign. That was what led to the victory in the first place. The Democrats, except for one or two progressive Democrats and a couple of genuine ones at the time, the rest of the city council and the mayor, they were really against it, but they were forced to take on this agenda because there was so much momentum behind it because of the strategy we used. It was a defiant fighting strategy, which involved action conferences that included thousands of workers, marches, rallies, and that was what put 15 on the map. And so, as you said, again, not surprisingly, the all-Democrat city council right now is trying to dismantle 15. And the way they're doing it is this is the kind of strategy that the politicians who represent the super rich, which is unfortunately both Democrats and Republicans, this is the strategy that they use, which it's where they're not full wholesale dismantling 15 yet, although that is very much their goal. In the first place, they never wanted it. They were forced to concede because part of the 15 Now strategy was a credible threat of a ballot initiative. We had a ballot initiative with enough signatures, a stronger $15 an hour ballot initiative with enough signatures. And we said, if the city council does not pass 15 in council chambers, we are going straight to the voters. And we know this can be done because, years later, I believe it was 2 years ago, when Ron DeSantis, the arch conservative, was reelected as governor of Florida, in the same ballot, the voters picked by a strong majority a $15 minimum wage. So it shows you that actually, even in so-called red states, working people are parched for any kind of real change for their own standards of living. And in the absence of a real left alternative, then they end up being misled by the right wing and the sort of Trumpist kind of agenda. And so here in Seattle, you have an all-Democrat city council carrying out an attack. And rather than go wholesale after it, which they know will immediately invite a kind of a working class rebellion, what they're instead doing is using other mechanisms. So, for example, the bill that's been put forward is to permanently enshrine what was a concession that big business ended up winning 10 years ago when we fought. We fought and won against many of their attempted loopholes, but we didn't win against all of them. And one of the loopholes, unfortunately, they ended up winning was making workers who work at businesses that have 500 or fewer employees, putting them on a slower trajectory towards 15. So they got a completely ridiculous 10-year phase-in. So obviously this is now the 10th year. So what they're trying to do is to make that 10-year, which obviously 10 years is long, but it's temporary. They want to make that permanent. In other words, workers at these smaller business, is obviously with a grain of salt because 500 or fewer employees, that's lots of large businesses. they are going to be denied what they are now, right now, by law eligible for, which is a $3+ an hour raise next year in January to bring them equal to everybody who has the high minimum wage. And keep in mind, this is really crucial. It's not enough given the insane cost of living crisis in Seattle, and also this is true nationwide. However, Seattle's minimum wage right now is the highest in any major city of the nation. It's at $20 an hour. So it's basically denying these workers that raise. But just to end on this context, to give you a sense of how many workers and what kind of workers are being betrayed, it is well over 200,000 workers, and I can't be exact because it's hard to come, the statistics are not available, but we've put together, based on statistics that are available, we've put together numbers, and we know that it is well over 200,000 workers. And to give you a sense of what kind of workers we're talking about, it includes workers in construction, food manufacturing, retail and wholesale trade, transportation and warehousing, educational services, food service and hospitality, laundry services, healthcare services, the highly exploitative nursing home industry, and social assistance. In other words, many of these are workers who are struggling with poverty, even with the minimum wage increases, and they are highly exploited workers and disproportionately Black, immigrant, and female.
And what is the rationale that they're giving? I'm sure it's highly technocratic and disingenuous. Why are they suddenly now, the sky did not fall, unlike, contrary to what Jeff Bezos and the rest of them said with a $15 minimum wage, why are they now trying to slow down the implementation?
In many ways, it's, you were getting flashback on the presidential election dimension, which obviously, I share that flashback with you. In many ways, what's happening now in Seattle on the $15 minimum wage is giving me also flashbacks, because that time, 10 years ago, the arguments that were made by these business spokespeople were very similar to what they are saying now. Basically, they are using small business as a shield to justify exploiting workers even more. I mean, let's be clear, this is capitalism. Workers are exploited by definition. This is a system that exploits billions of people. But $15 an hour is a measure of justice against this highly exploitative system. It is nowhere enough. And at the same time, we have to defend against attacks on it. And the stated rationale to attack this is very similar to what they had said 10 years ago when we were fighting for 15 in the first place, which is that, these small businesses can't afford it, they're going to go out of business, that it's about saving jobs. This is what they said the whole time. At that time, complete gaslighting of workers and poor people. They said this again now. I was in City Hall, with the press conference and with other working class people, with other members of Workers Strike Back, with other socialists, my fellow socialists. We were there to give public testimony. I spoke myself in the public testimony, and there were business owners who spoke there as well, and they were saying the same things. We can't make this work. It's about saving small businesses. It's also about saving jobs. I'm here as a business owner who cares so much about my employees, and it is to save them that we need to screw them over. I mean, that's not what they said, but that's the interpretation.
That's a good neoliberal bumper sticker.
Oh, completely. Yeah. And I just wanted to quote, a very important quote from a labor leader who played a key role in the movement at that time to win the $15 minimum wage. His response, I'm quoting from his response to the Seattle Times, where the response is to the other claim that big business are making by using small business as a shield. And unfortunately, many medium-sized, very well-off business owners are also part of this. We have to understand, it's obviously Amazon and Microsoft. These are the behemoths that not only control capitalism, the billionaires, it's also they who take the lion's share of the wealth. But at the same time, the ideological corruption from capitalism is also among the wealthy but less wealthy people. So I'm talking about people who own restaurants and other food service businesses, other hospitality, so-called hospitality industry businesses in Seattle, who are maybe not as wealthy as Jeff Bezos, but nonetheless, they are extremely wealthy and they are gaslighting workers. So one of the claims that they made at that time, and also now they're remaking this claim, is that that businesses are so busy running their business. They're so busy just making ends meet. They don't have the information. They won't be able to cope with the complexities of the law. This is what they said then. And now they're saying, oh, we lots of businesses are not even aware that next year they're going to have to pay $3+ an hour more, to their employees. They don't know they're going to get in trouble. And can you believe the absurdity of this, though? Like, after 10 years, you don't know what you need to pay your employees? Come on. Like, how credible is that claim? So I want to quote David Rolfe, the former, at that time, he was the president of SEIU 775. He said to the Seattle Times, quote, "These guys got 10 years to get their act together. And if they haven't figured out how to run a successful business without screwing workers, shame on them. They don't deserve to be in business." And he also said, undermining Seattle's minimum wage law is political suicide for anyone who tries, end quote. And I want to come back to that point. But, again, in answer to your question, they're making some of the same arguments. I'll just end with this. They are making one additional argument, which, again, is completely scandalous. They are trying to justify this legislation. And it's not only businesses, it's the Democrats who are justifying their legislation based on the COVID pandemic. They say that when the city's minimum wage law made the two-tiered system temporary, it, quote, "did not contemplate or account for such a pandemic nor such levels of inflation," end quote. I'm reading this from the actual legislation. They say that, well, now after the fact, because these businesses have gone through the pandemic and all the inflation, now it needs new intervention from policymakers. But this is just upside down and shocking and completely insulting to workers. Yesterday in City Hall, one of the workers who was there to protest against this law said, he sort of shouted it out during the proceedings, where he said, "Do you know that workers died during the pandemic trying to keep your businesses alive?" I mean, just how supremely out of touch is it for Democrats to argue that the pandemic and inflation, which have been utterly devastating for working people, then can be used as an excuse to decrease wages.
Right. And also, I mean, I've been to Seattle a few times. I don't really know how many people could live comfortably in Seattle on $15. I don't know how many people could live comfortably on $20. It's an incredibly expensive city. I remember looking at a report that said rent had gone up some 70% in a 5-year period. So we're talking at this point, even though it was historic, you and other socialist victory, I mean, $15 is not enough as it is, and they're trying to chip away. At a certain point, you have to wonder, do they actually care if people can eat? It does not seem that way.
They certainly don't. And in fact, what we have to also, to your point, we also have to look at what lies behind this. So for them, for the Democrats, for big business, for the wealthy, it's not just about what they can win with this bill. With this bill, they're testing the waters. That's what they're doing. They're seeing how far they can go. That's the problem here. It is the thin edge of the wedge. If we let them do this, if we let them get away with this, then they're going to come for more. And what is that going to look like? That is going to mean that big business gets a green light to start dismantling all the other victories that we have won. And, I was on the city council, as you know, Jordan, for a decade. And during that decade, I won 4 elections. I left the city council undefeated. They weren't able to defeat us. And on top of that, they weren't able to prevent us from winning despite everything that they tried. I mean, they fought us tooth and nail, but still we were able to win the $15 wage. We won the Amazon tax that raises $214 million every year to fund affordable housing. We won a whole slew of unprecedented renters' rights, despite the massive opposition from the Democrats. I mean, they were completely odious towards working class renters and poor people, and yet we won all of this. But if this bill goes through, then you better believe it, they get the green light to go on further rampage. But it's not only that, it also then now puts the $15 victories won in other cities and states across the nation also squarely in target, and because big business will be emboldened to go after other 15s. I mean, if they can go after the flagship $15 victory, then what's to stop them from going and destroying 15 that was won in other cities. So look at what we have here, right, Jordan? This is the state of the situation. You have Democrats in Congress and the Biden regime completely breaking their promise to raise the national minimum wage to $15 an hour. They completely betrayed workers on that. Instead, what do you see Democrats doing across the country? They're trying to dismantle and destroy what we have won, the gains that working class people have already won. This is the Democratic Party.
And, something else, Seattle has, of major cities, one of the worst homeless problem. Nationally, homelessness was up 12% last year. I find that to be, the number is always hard to really know for sure because the way they study it, the time in point measurement of homelessness is always difficult to fully understand. And a lot of homelessness is actually people moving couch to couch, not actually living outside. But there was also another report, shockingly, in the Washington Post that homelessness among working people is significantly up. People who work but are still homeless. So I feel if they get away with unraveling the $15 minimum wage, that's pouring more gasoline onto a fire because people are very close, a couple dollars here or there in minimum wage on top of their other bills from not being able to pay rent in cities like Seattle.
Truly, I mean, the problem is just astounding, and it's stomach turning that in the wealthiest country in the history of humanity, where you have more billionaires than ever, you have the largest homelessness problem that we have ever seen in anybody's lifetimes. It is completely unconscionable. And homelessness, as we've, I'm sure, talked about before, has such a dehumanizing and dignity robbing effect on human beings, and not to mention the specific kind of violence that women and LGBTQ people face in terms of sexual violence because of being completely unprotected. And so it is just blatant for the Democratic Party to not actually address homelessness. By what they should really be doing is increasing the Amazon tax that we won in order to make affordable housing available for all. But such a thing is never going to happen with the parties of capitalism, which both the Democrats and Republicans are. Instead, now they're going after what we have actually done, one, in order to make people's lives better with better standards of living. I mean, to share with you, one of the speakers at the press conference yesterday that we did, that Workers Strike Back did against this odious law, was a worker who works at Harborview Medical Center, which is a publicly funded medical center here. And they were saying that many of their co-workers, and they're union members, many of their co-workers, and these are hospital workers, end up living in their cars, even though they have a steady paycheck. They're going to work every day. They are making the hospitals run. But rents, as you were correctly describing, are so high that they can't afford to have a roof over their heads, and they're living in their cars. And then, in the meanwhile, you saw in California, the Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, who was one of the people who was supposedly a candidate, potential replacement for Biden, he issued an executive order recently calling for a crackdown across the state on homeless encampments, using the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling that cities are now allowed to fine and jail unhoused people sleeping outside. Why? Because there's no shelter available. So even if people are sleeping outside because they have no alternative and they have to exist somewhere, I mean, this is the basic right of humanity, to exist somewhere, and that right is being taken away because the Supreme Court has given them the green light. But look at the juxtaposition here and what's on offer for working and poor people. The Supreme Court, that's a reactionary Supreme Court, many of them Trump appointees, but overall they are reactionary. This is a reactionary ruling from the court. And who's making use of it? It's a Democrat in a supposedly blue state. This is why the whole idea of supporting Democrats or Republicans is a complete dead end for working people. And just to put a further fine point on it, as I said, this is now an all-Democrat city council in Seattle. It's 9 Democrats, and it is a majority people of color city council. It is a majority woman city council. So all this should be so revealing to working people that none of this is actually standing up for ordinary people What we need is a new party for working people. And of course, I think we need concrete strategies towards that. And this year, in the presidential election year, we cannot have an abstentionist position. That's why Workers Strike Back recently actually carried out a democratic discussion and vote to endorse Jill Stein, who has a very progressive, strong progressive program. It's not, we don't have the fantasy idea that she's going to win, but the point is that we need a concrete alternative, an anti-war, pro-worker alternative to the parties of big business, and Harris and Trump are candidates of the parties of the billionaire class, and then using that as a platform to build something new, a new party for working people.
And before we move on to the election nationally, how do people get involved in stopping this? Because I do think you're right. If they are able to chip away at the $15 minimum wage here, it's just the first domino in other states to do it. So how do people get involved? What do you need from people both in Seattle and outside?
We need such a massive fight back against this, because as you said, if this goes through, it's going to be deadly. And so we need people, especially in Seattle. So if you're watching this and you're in Seattle, then I'm going to tell you how you can get involved, and we really need you to get involved. But even if you're not in Seattle, there are ways you can be involved, and we need the voices of working people from across the nation against this. So firstly, if you're in Seattle, then we're holding a rally on Sunday outside City Hall. If you're in Seattle, you'll know where City Hall is. It's on 6th and James in Seattle downtown. Meet us at the 4th Avenue side of the City Hall Plaza. All these details will be available on workersstrikeback.org. I'm not sure they're available. Sorry, this will air tomorrow. The details will be available at workersstrikeback.org. So if you go to workersstrikeback, all one word, .org, you'll get all the details. We need a big showing. We need hundreds of people to come to this rally. And then after that, our next step is Tuesday afternoon, Seattle time, in City Hall. Unfortunately, the City Council meets at a very inhospitable time to keep working people from getting involved. So it is in the middle of the workday. But if you can take your lunch hour at that time, we need you to show up. We need hundreds of people to pack City Hall in order to hear from us. We need to create a ruckus. This is how you need to win. The only way we are going to win either defensive victories like this, which is preventing attacks, or better yet, of offensive victories where we can win new gains like we won 10 years ago when we won 15. We need to create a ruckus. We need to disrupt business as usual and not accept the idea of decorum. It is decorum by the ruling class that is screwing over working people. So we have to proudly go there as a working class movement and disrupt business as usual and send a message to the Democrats, as we said yesterday, that any Democrat who votes yes on this is going, should face consequences in their re-election. And just to tell you this, the sponsor of this bill is this woman called Joy Hollingsworth, who ended up winning the election in the district that I was the district council member of. And after I stepped away, she ended up winning the election. She is Black. She identifies as Black, queer, woman, and she's used those identities a lot in order to play up her credentials as if she's standing with ordinary people. She's the messenger of this for big business. She also got a number of endorsements and a number of dollars from the labor movement. She was endorsed by the Martin Luther King County Labor Council, which is the AFL-CIO of this region. And look at how she is stabbing workers in the back. So we need the labor movement to speak up as well. We have some leaders who are speaking up, but we need the strength of the labor movement to be brought here. Let's just to give you a concrete example. There are disagreements on the left. I've had disagreements with labor leaders. We're very open and honest about it. At the same time, insisting on unity, the maximum possible unity on a principled basis. That is the basis on which we won 15. It was principled unity between the labor movement and the socialists that allowed us to win 15. That is the kind of unity we need to bring to bear in order to win this. So a few years ago, when I was in the city council, there was the police contract that was up for a vote because they have their own union, but they are, in many ways, they are not part of the overall labor movement for understandable reasons. Understandable as in for obvious reasons that
Right.
they represent the state, they represent police violence and so on. And At that time, I was going to be the only no vote on that police contract, because that's the principal thing I have to do as a socialist. And the Teamster leader at that time, he said he was very angry. They were very angry because they were supporting the police union, and they said that, and it was a message to me, that it was, I think, in 2018. They said that if any council member dares to vote against this bill to ratify the contract, we're going to come after you. I voted no, and they did come after me. Unfortunately, in a reactionary way. This is deeply unfortunate that any section of the labor leadership should take a reactionary position, but they did. Not that the rank and file agreed with them, and we won our election despite their opposition, despite the opposition of Amazon in 2019. However, the point I'm trying to make is that that's the kind of fire that the labor movement needs to bring for a progressive cause. The labor leaders need to be there saying to Councilmember Hollingsworth, as I said yesterday in my public testimonial, that Hollingsworth, she should be booted out of city council just for thinking of bringing this bill. She should withdraw this bill and apologize to working people. And yet she does not deserve to be reelected, because how can you do this? How can you stab workers in the back after having taken money from the labor movement?